This episode of Brains on Games is a preview of a dexterity game about evolution. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode I'm super excited to be telling you about a game that's coming up on Kickstarter very soon, and I'll include a link to the campaign in the show notes. This is a dexterity game by one of my favorite Canadian designers, Yves Tourigny, and the folks over at Meridae Games sent me a copy of it not too long ago. It's a game called Flicking Finches. This is a game that works for players aged 10 and up, although younger players can definitely play this as well. As long as they've got the flicking ability, they can play this game. You can play a game in 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and it works for between 2 and 4 players. Let's take a look at Flicking Finches. As you might know from watching almost any episode of this show, I love dexterity games. There is just something about being able to pull off a difficult shot or a trick shot where, myself or the kids will be raising our arms in triumph. And sometimes you get that feeling from other kinds of strategy games, but in dexterity games it happens often, at least at our place, and there's lots of laughter as well. This game has a great mat. Look, it's this neoprene mat that you're playing on, so it's a super smooth surface for flicking these birds. Now, as you might be able to see, I'm not sure if you can read it on the camera, but this is a picture of the Galápagos Islands, and 1835 is the date on there, and that means that this guy over here must be Charles Darwin. So the game involves some evolution, but the rule book is very clear that evolution does not involve flicking in any way. So you've got these little birds that you're going to be flicking around. These are the finches that you're flicking in a game of Flicking Finches, and you're trying to get Charles Darwin's attention so that he will sketch your birds in his sketchbook. To set up a game of Flicking Finches, you are going to start by setting up Darwin's sketchbook, and that means you're going to deal 5 of these cards in a 3 or 4 player game. You only deal 4 of them in a 2 player game, so there's a little bit less flicking to be had in a game with only 2 players. But you can see that the sketchbook has pictures of birds with different features on them. Most of these that I just dealt out, all but one, are large birds. A couple of the first ones are striped. We've got a round beak and a pointed beak. So what's going to happen is Darwin wants to fill up his sketchbook. He's going to work from left to right. So you're going to get some points if you can get his attention when you've got a bird that matches as many of the features as possible on the sketch that he's working on. The first player is going to be the person who most recently fed a bird, and he's not going to get to play any of his birds on the first round while things are still setting up. What he does get to do, if all the players agree, is place some of these clouds, and this just adds some complexity to the game. You can put these anywhere on the board, and they're just obstacles that your finches are going to bounce off of when you're flicking them around. Now, you can't cover up nesting sites and things like that, but you can put those anywhere on the board where they're not going to be too much in the way. But if you're beginning your turn from one of these nests, it might be hard to get around these clouds. You might have to move them by flicking your bird into them and knocking them around. Once the first player has placed the clouds, the second player gets to place one of their finches somewhere on the board, and I might pick one where my finch matches exactly the one that the Darwin's working on in the sketchbook. The second player places 1. The third player is able to place 2 of those birds on the board, and you place your birds on these nesting sites. So at the beginning of the game, before Darwin shows up on the board, you get to place your birds on any nesting site that you like. But once Darwin comes along, things change a little bit. The final player, once they've placed their finches, is going to place Darwin on one of the islands. And this is, Darwin it's his attention that you're trying to get. You want him to draw your bird into the sketchbook. Once Darwin is placed, if you want to add an additional bird, that requires a hatch action, and we'll talk about that. Now the game is ready to begin, and what players are going to do on each turn in this game is choose 3 out of 4 possible actions. Now you get a free one at the beginning of your turn, a free evolve action. The evolve action allows you to switch out one of your birds with another one where only one feature is different. So here I might be able to, I've got a big striped bird with a round beak. I could change that if I wanted to a big striped bird with a pointed beak instead. Or a small, let me find it here, or a small striped bird with a round beak. So I'm just changing the size. So an evolve action allows you to change one feature of the bird. And that's the first thing, the first skill that's kind of required for the game is that you're doing some matching. You're matching those details, the size, the color, whether it's striped or solid, and the shape of the beak. You get a free evolve action at the beginning of your turn, or you can take an evolve action as one of your 3 official actions later on. You could also hatch a bird somewhere on this mat. Now, what you have to do when you're hatching is place a bird on the nesting site that matches the number of the island where Darwin is. So you couldn't, if he's on island number 6, like he is here in this game, I couldn't hatch a bird over here once the game begins, or over here. I have to go all the way up here. See where it says 5, 6, and 7. So whenever Darwin is on 5, 6, or 7, this is where the birds are going to hatch. So if I wanted to hatch a second one, I could add it over here at that nesting site. Of course, in a dexterity game, one of the most important things that you're going to be doing is moving your pieces around the board. And that's another action you can take, is a fly action where you flick one of your birds so that he's flying somewhere across this mat. You can bang into clouds. The only thing that matters, well, there's 2 things that matter when you're flicking this bird. If he goes off of the board, he comes back into your supply and you can hatch it again later on. If you knock another player's bird off the mat, what will happen is that player will get their bird back. And even if it's just leaning off the mat a little bit, it comes off the board, that player gets that bird back into their supply and they get an egg. Now the egg can be used, you can turn it in for a free hatch action. So on the blue player's turn, because I knocked a blue player's bird off, they have a free hatch action if they want to take it. If they hang on to this egg until the end of the game, they'll get 2 extra victory points, 2 extra seeds. Seeds is what you're collecting as victory points in a game of flicking finches, because that's what finches eat. Now, in the actual game, the eggs are going to be in the player's color. You're only allowed to have 1 of these eggs, and 4 came in this prototype, but they're all the same color. In the game itself, the components might change a little bit, and certainly one of the things that's going to change is that the eggs will be in the player color. As I was saying, if you knock your own bird off, it goes back in your supply. You don't get an egg. If you knock an opponent's bird off, they get an egg and they get the bird back in their supply. If you knock into Darwin and knock him over, or even if you just bump into him and don't knock him over, if you knock a cloud into Darwin, which might be hard when they're this far away because the clouds are sort of rough, they don't slide around as much, it makes it a little easier to bounce your birds off of them. But if you knock into Darwin, he's going to move to the next island. So it goes in number order. So now if there's nobody in number 7, that's where he's going to go. If number 7 is blocked somehow, if there's a bird already there, he's going to skip that and go all the way over to number 8. The final action, the 4th one that you can take, is to chirp to get Darwin's attention. And if a player uses a chirp action, well, they have to say chirp, and then Darwin is going to sketch the finch that is closest to him. And in this case, I've moved mine right in there, and that comes off the board and it goes right on the sketchbook card. And now Darwin's going to work on the next sketch. If he hears a chirp, he's also going to move to the next island in number order. So he's continuously moving around the circle here in the Galápagos as he's drawing these finches. Now he's moved to number 7, which puts him pretty close here to this other bird, but this other bird doesn't match very many features of the one that Darwin wants to draw, which leads me to an interesting strategy. If eventually somebody knocks my yellow bird in here, they might chirp so that Darwin draws this one, And then this goes up here, and it's a small bird. It's solid in color, but it has a pointy beak, so it only matches one feature. That means I'm only going to get one seed at the end of the game, and it takes one of my birds off the board. So there is some strategy beyond just flicking things around and trying to set up blocks. You might purposely move Darwin. You might chirp to move him or knock into him to move him to the next island so that another player can't get too close. You might chirp to force Darwin to draw a bird that's not going to get your opponent too many points, but that also takes their bird off the board. Which is one of the, that's another thing I think that's great about this design, is that as a player is earning more points and more of their birds are being drawn in the sketchbook, they have fewer and fewer options. Now here I've got some points. That's going to earn me, this is a perfect match, so that earns me 5 seeds at the end of the game, but this only earns me 1. So I've got 6 points here, but now I only have 6 birds that I can use for the rest of the game because these ones are out. They're done. I cannot use them again. They're there to mark how many points I've earned. And that, in a nutshell, is Flicking Finches. It's a super simple game to learn and to teach. It's easy to carry around. Like I said, this is a prototype, so some things might change. One thing I know for sure is changing is that this box is going to be a little bit smaller. Here, I'm holding it sideways. The box is going to be a little bit smaller when it comes out. This fits exactly into the cubes on a Kallax, and when I first got it, I thought, oh, this is pretty close to the size of a cube, and when I stuck it in there, I couldn't get it back out because I couldn't get my fingers around the edges. It was such a tight fit. So making the box an inch or so smaller is going to be helpful for those who have shelves like mine so that the game doesn't get stuck. I had to use a string to get behind the box and pull it out again. So that's a little bit inside baseball maybe, but there you go. So we are talking about a game that involves a little bit of strategy. There's some matching in terms of the bird's features. There's one other skill that I think is important. Well, really it's multiple things, but what you're doing in this game, it's a visual motor game. So it's hand-eye coordination in terms of flicking these birds around. And one of the things I like about dexterity games is not only do you have to think about your physical movements, you're thinking about your body, which is something lots of psychologists talk to anxious people about, is to kind of be aware of what's happening inside of them and to not be too nervous or frightened about that. But also, you get immediate feedback if you're too impulsive. If I've got a bird in the middle here and I just flick it without thinking, I'm not going to get the points that I want. It's not going to have the impact that I want. And that immediate feedback is that you were too impulsive. You need to be more careful. Aim. Think about what you're doing. Which is also the reason why you get so many, arms raised and cheering and excitement when you do a really great shot or something funny happens in a game like this, is that everything is immediate. You're not taking an action that's going to pay off 3 turns later. Pretty much everything you're doing has some sort of immediate payoff, so that you're getting that immediate feedback, and part of the feedback is about learning to control impulsivity, which is a great thing for so many kids and maybe some adults as well. Thanks so much to Meridae Games for sending this, and to Yves for creating it, because I think this is a fantastic game. I'm really looking forward to the Kickstarter campaign to see what kinds of surprises might be in store. I should mention that as you fill up that sketchbook, there's only 5 cards at the beginning, but by the end of the game, you're going to be working to complete 3 rows, and that's when the game ends, is once 3 rows of the sketchbook have been completed, and that's what allows it to go on for about 45 minutes. It's only 2 rows in a 2-player game, but 3 rows in a 3 or a 4-player game. If you have any questions about Flicking Finches or the games behind me, if you have any suggestions for Brains on Games, you can leave them in the comments below this video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous episodes are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and happy flicking!